All right, so not to seem like I'm jumping on any bandwagons or anything, but I kind of want to talk about Charlie Kirk for a second. But also, I want you to bear in mind that what I'm going to say about Charlie Kirk, you could also apply to his many inspirations, contemporaries, and those who he has inspired or will inspire. Because a lot of my criticisms of him are not exclusive to Charlie Kirk, but bear in mind that because of his unfortunate death, he is going to become emblematic of his brand, I guess you can say, right? So, how I'm going to begin is to say this. A lot of people are like, well, just because he offended you doesn't mean that he deserved to die, or however you want to frame it. Or if he offended you, that was a sign that you needed to do more work, right? Because the implication being is that offense was an emotional reaction because an intellectual reaction wasn't possible, right? I got angry or I got offended because of my intellectual frustration, right? And that's not it. That's not at all why Charlie Kirk offended me. I think the reason why he offended me is not really that he offended me. He offended what I thought was true, sincere, productive, and I will say mutually beneficial debate. In essence, I was offended by Charlie Kirk being the face of debate, when in reality, he was not the face of debate. He was actually bad at debate. What he was really good at was the performance and the illusion of debate. He was good, and I can't take away, the guy had skill, the guy had practice, and the guy had talent in what you might consider the spectator sport of debate. But if you really break down Charlie Kirk as a debater, he was bad at it. He was, and if I was more interested, or if this was a bigger point, I would take a clip of Charlie Kirk and show you what I mean, or I would have a montage or a compilation, but I'm too lazy for that. But I would have a montage of times where he was using fallacious arguments, or he would intentionally change the subject, or he would dodge a question and answer the question he wanted to answer, and on and on. All of those fallacies and all of those tips and tricks on how to look like you're winning debate, he employed them all. And again, he did it for years. He was good at it. It was also, you could tell from his personality, he had a persona. He had practice. The whole mic on the table thing, that was a strategy, right? He did that because it looks like when you have the mic on the table that you're the one in control of the argument, as opposed to holding the mic up to your face you have this unbridled emotion that's overflowing. Now, maybe that's not a conscious thing, right? But there's something to be said for the person who's speaking calmly, evenly, waiting their turn with the mic. It seems like a silly little thing, but take that type of strategy, take that type of imagery, and multiply that of the many things he did, right? His whole image was built on a certain persona that he wanted you to see. The same argument can be said for the different strategies of, let's say, the Ben Shapiro's, or the Tucker Carlson's, or the Sean Hannity's, or the Steven Crowder's, right? It's a polished image because they understand that the optics of it are just as important as what the rhetoric of it, of what they're saying, right? So what I will say is this: I was upset that Charlie Kirk represented debate because I thought it was bad debate, and I understood that anyone who watched him and who was impressed by his ability to kind of win an argument are the same people who see The Rock Russell and think, wow, he fight good, right? Because it was tailored, it was edited. He chose college campuses because he knew that type of environment, if he can win over the crowd against the core, the heart of liberal America, which was the college campus, then it looks like he was willing to go into the lion's den. But the other thing about college campuses is you have some people there who their frontal lobe hasn't even completely solidified. So a lot of times what they're doing is they're just regurgitating the things they've learned. Not to say that there aren't brilliant college students, but that type of knowledge that a college student will have is going to be a lot easier to shoot down and pick apart and pick on than someone who's actually doing the work in the field, who's worked with as a drug counselor, who has that real world experience, or someone who's really truly deeply delved into a topic, like an expert in a field, or a person who can really speak from a wealth of knowledge, as opposed to a lot of these college students who, God bless them, were just regurgitating points they've heard, or are more influenced by talking points and TikToks than like hard-nosed research, right? So he knew the audience, he knew the opponent, if you will, that would be the most vulnerable to his style of debate. But also, and I've known people, my cousin, she said that when she saw him, he came to her college campus a couple years back in 16 or 17, I don't remember, but basically South Florida University. And she said that he was actually there for almost 2 hours, but the video that you saw was about 45 minutes. And she said that more times than not, he either got stumped, he started changing the subject, or he says, hey, listen, we could talk about this all day, but there's other people, right? So she said that what she saw and what we saw on the edited, cleaned up clip were not the same, right? Now, she didn't go on to say that he got completely embarrassed and they laughed him off the whatever, but she said that if people saw exactly how hard he had to work to get those 40 minutes, it would be less impressive, right? So I'm sure it's not news to you guys that if he's taking the footage and he's putting it on his channel, he's not going to put his bad performances on his channel, right? He's basically making a greatest hits of Charlie Kirk being awesome on college campuses. Again, you could say the same thing about Ben Shapiro. You could say the same thing about Steven Crowder, or all those other people who decide to do, who have the debates, right? The real life debates, right? And also that includes those people who have those like debate bro channels where on their streams, a lot of times, when they have those kind of real life debates, they can cultivate the image they want you to see. And Charlie Kirk was the expert at that, right? So all of that is to say, to not go completely off the topic, if you're going to think about Charlie Kirk and his legacy, besides me disagreeing with what he was saying, and there's many disagreements with what he was saying, even the way he said it, even the style of it, I felt was bad for debate. Because the debate that I've always enjoyed, the debate that I've always kind of embraced, was two people come to a place where I have this opinion, or I have this view, or I have this belief, or I subscribe to this philosophy, whatever you want to call it, or then you come and you have your idea and you have your philosophies and blah 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 blah, or you have your approach to a problem, I have my approach to a problem, and you come and you bring your argument to the table. And based on the validity of the argument, the accuracy of the argument, the way that argument can be applied to the situation or other situations, between the two of you, there's an intellectual honesty that the best argument wins. Not who can get the crowd on their side, not who can make the other person lose their temper, not who's yelling and who's calm. It was simply about, if you're saying we should build a bridge and you're saying we should dig a tunnel, then which is the better idea for traversing that body of water, if you get my meaning, right? So I hated what he represented, but also understand he didn't invent that style, right? There's a lot of other people who did what he did. He just brought it together. And you want to know who did that? Street preachers and street magicians, right? His legacy or his style or the genre of debate that he got really good at was basically the marriage of street preachers like Ray Comfort and street magicians like David Blaine, right? And like those two people, if you understand how it's done, if you really understand the meat and potatoes of how you become an effective street preacher or how you become an effective street magician, you understand it's 90% strategy, 10% content, right? A buddy of mine in the early 2000s, and it's a little embarrassing, he decided that he wanted to become a street magician. And because I guess David Blaine and Chris Angel were all the rage at the time, and it was like a fad, right? Like kind of affliction shirts. It was trendy to become a street magician. So I used to help him. I used to help him with some of his tricks. And I saw some of the sleight of hand. I saw some of the misdirection. I saw some of the things that he would do to make sure that the trick that he did in person looked impressive, right? And one of the reasons why a street magician seems so impressive is for the same reason it seems like Steven Crowder and Ben Shapiro and Charlie Kirk are impressive, because they're doing it live. They're doing it up close. They're doing it seemingly in the moment. But if you know what they're doing, if you see the tips and if you see the tricks, if you see the sleight of hand, if you know what you're looking for, you understand it's not as impressive. It's simply doing what they've practiced. It's simply knowing that if they hit this wall, then this is how they divert. If they run into this problem, then this is how they kind of shift the topic. A classic example, you're going to see Charlie Kirk do it all the time, where someone will present him with a question he can't answer, so he will literally take their question and either trample over it with his own with the answer he wants to answer, and by the way, politicians do it too, or he'll say, so what you're asking is ba, ba, ba. And again, answer the question he wants to answer because he knows he can't answer that question. If I have the time and interest, I might actually do the thing that I just said before, where I'm going to show you a clip of Charlie Kirk, and I'm going to point out, and by the way, I could also do it again, which Ben Shapiro or Steven Crowder, whoever, I'm going to show you a clip and point at it, line by line. Oh, this is the misdirection. Oh, this is where he throws out a bit of information that sounds impressive, but there's no way you can confirm that. Or this is the point in which he contradicts himself, but hopes you don't notice. I can do that. It just seems like a lot more work and a lot more pettiness because there's people who do it better than I am, right? But the point I'm trying to make here is that Charlie Kirk or any of those people, it's a strategy. It's a way. It's a cool magic trick. It's street magic. And going back to what I was saying about street preachers, it's the same thing. It's about crowd control. It's about getting people on your side. It's about optics. Okay? So what it boils down to for me, and this is the second part of what I want to say, as someone who had disagreed with him politically, there seems to be a lot of criticism about people like me and my reaction, right, to his death. Because I think there's this belief that because he's dead, that somehow his legacy and his message and his life are going to be whitewashed or canonized, or we need to now take a second look at who he was and what he represented, because if he died, his martyrdom, and I hate to call it martyrdom, his martyrdom is going to somehow validate his message, which I disagree with completely, right? And I say this simply. How I felt about him before his death has not changed after his death. What I felt about political violence before his death has not changed after his death. What I felt about the idea that he was bad for this country before he died has not changed. I think he's bad for this country, but unfortunately, I think he's worse. His death made it worse because of what I just said. His message and his bad arguments are now going to be treated as if there was some sort of there's some sort of elevation to the validity and the importance and the urgency of his message, because some dummy or some lunatic or some whomever, we still don't know, decided that it was easier to kill him than to prove him wrong, as he would say. And I'm sorry that he died. I'm sorry he died on a human level, because again, I don't care who it is. I do not think a person should die. Murder is murder, right? Being shot and killed is not a good thing. I don't care who you are. And maybe I'm an extremist for saying it, but I do not believe in murder as a means of influence, or as a means of rebellion, or whatever you want to call it, however you want to frame it. I do not believe in righteous killing, right? I'm also empathetic to the man. I'm empathetic to his family who lost a loved one. They didn't lose a political figure. They lost a husband or a father or a brother or whomever, right? I'm sympathetic to the people who witnessed a horrible crime, a violent act, because that, whether like it or not, is going to sit with them, right? My views on the sanctity of human life have not changed simply because I disagreed with the individual whose life was lost, right? None of that has changed, right? But I will also point out the irony, right? That the fact that he died on the way he died was something that in his life he showed very little regard for. When presented with people who were suffering and dying, he showed an indifference to it. In fact, on a kind of subliminal way, he sometimes showed an enjoyment of that, especially when the person who died was someone who he felt was less than. And there was a lot of people in Charlie Kirk's view who were less than. And we cannot ignore the fact that he had a hierarchy of human life and a hierarchy of human value, and he was a firm believer in justified death or justified suffering or justified retributive justice, right? For him, the strong must rule. Unfortunately, when you have a gun and you shoot someone, you're the strong by his view. And he himself had said it. If some people have to die from gun violence to protect the rights of the Second Amendment, so be it. He himself said it. He did not believe in empathy. He saw empathy as weakness. He said it. He himself created the environment that led to his death. Once again, that's not to say he deserves it, because unlike Charlie Kirk, I do not believe that he deserved to die. I'm empathetic and sympathetic to Charlie Kirk, because unlike Charlie Kirk, I do not believe that empathy is something a person earns. Sympathy is not something a person earns. That comes from me, not them, right? If I'm sympathetic and I mourn a person's death, I mourn it, not because they've earned my mourning. I hope that makes sense to you, right? So to be clear, as someone who disagrees with Charlie Kirk on almost everything, as someone who thought he was destructive to not only American politics, but also the way people treat each other, right? The way I felt like he influenced kind of a hard heart and influenced the kind of the social hierarchy, the way he kind of influenced what I saw as racism and bigotry and Christian nationalism, which I am vehemently opposed to all of those things. As much as I hated the fact, as much as I hated everything he stood for and represented, I never hated the man. And I still felt like his life was valid and valuable. And I'm sorry that he died. I'm sorry he died on a human level, but also I'm sorry that he died for, call it selfish reasons, because he was never given the opportunity to be embarrassed out of the public, outside of the public view. We never got a chance to see the downfall of Charlie Kirk. We never got to see the time where he became the next Glenn Beck, where who, right? We never got to see the day where he became the next Tucker Carlson, who went from the top of the hill, but because of his own bad behavior or because he angered the wrong people, he was now relegated to the sidelines. We never saw the epic takedown of Charlie Kirk and he was never exposed. That's the thing I regret a lot more from his death, is that he died a martyr and he didn't fade into obscurity. I much would have preferred him being fading into obscurity, because one, it didn't mean he died, but also it meant that he becomes less influential. So if you ask me how I feel, the way I felt about him, the way I felt about political violence, the way I felt about the nature of debate, the way I feel about the culture of America was the same before as it is now. None of that has changed. And I'm not going to be guilted and I'm not going to be shamed into being treated that the fact that I didn't have a scales for my eyes conversion to becoming a Charlie Kirk fan simply because of his assassination. That's not on me, bro. That it's not up to me to whitewash his history just because some bad person took him out. I hope that clarifies things, and I hope on my rambling it made sense. Ask questions, engage if you like it, and if you disagreed or think I said something wrong, what's the phrase? Prove me wrong. All right? Have a good one.